Sir, so I wanted to come on here today and talk to you because we've been receiving a lot of phone calls from our viewers, just obviously concerned about, what's happening around our country, demanding change. And, that also comes in what a lot of people are seeing. In Minneapolis, the city council is talking about, dismantling the police department. And, you've got LA Mayor Eric Garcetti, who is now redirecting some of the funds that would normally go to the police department for other causes in the community. So people want to know, what can we expect here in Sacramento? So my first question for you would be, would dismantling the police department be something you would consider?
No, I don't think that that is a rational or credible way to go about solving these very serious and systemic problems. In the moment, with the feelings that people have, I understand its appeal, but I don't think the people of Sacramento want or would support dismantling our police department. I'm for continuing to build upon the reforms that we started and to reform modern policing. And to do so not just by word, but by action in a whole number of areas. That's my approach. So we can talk more about that.
Yeah, what does that reform look like? What would your ideas be?
First of all, let me, so this whole question, which is a variant of the dismantling question that you asked, where a lot of advocates are calling for defunding the police department, or as you said, shifting funding. And I think that those are important conversations. The minute you start talking about money, you have a polarized conversation. So I choose to enter into this conversation by asking a very different question, which I think could get us to much the same place. And this is the question. Why in our society, including in our community, do we expect police officers to respond to every community crisis, whether or not it has anything to do with the breaking of the law or enforcing the law? I'll give you a prime example. The number of 911 calls that the city police department has to address when someone is having a mental health crisis is off the charts. And those often are the situations that can turn volatile, but I'll tell you, they can turn volatile when the person on the other end sees somebody in uniform approach with a gun. The truth of the matter is, it's our failure collectively, and thus our responsibility to actually develop other ways to respond to people in distress out in our communities. We should be having trained mental health workers that are responding to the family member whose loved one is in psychiatric crisis. We should have more trained mental health outreach workers, which Lord knows we are trying to raise and to grow to address the homeless problem in Sacramento and in the country. Part of the problem is that we have decided, either implicitly or explicitly, that our police, and to some degree our fire department, but our police especially, are going to be the default for every call that is imaginable that comes through that 911 system. And they are neither trained adequately, nor is it appropriate for people with batons and guns to be entering into so many of these situations that don't have anything to do with an actual criminal act or enforcing the law. Once you have that conversation and you begin to recognize that the police function actually ought to be limited to enforcing the law, then the money follows. And that's the conversation that I hope that we have in our community and in our country, because we are putting police officers in unfair and risky situations, and we're putting the community in unfair and risky situations, in part because we have not developed the other systems that have people who are better trained and better equipped and frankly less threatening to be able to go out into different community situations, mental health again being the prime example, to de-escalate and to help the person who needs help.
So do you think by doing that, how would that work? I mean, you're talking about, when somebody calls 911 and when, the operator realizes that it's more of a mental call, mental health situation, instead of calling the police department, calling, a health professional or somebody who is trained to deal with that, how would that work? Would that mean that you would have to allocate some of the funding for the police department to then come up with a new force, of mental health professionals?
Potentially, yes, because the money should follow the function as opposed to, let's defund the police. I mean, it sounds good, I suppose, to some people, doesn't sound good to others, but it's not the kind of thoughtful conversation and action that I think will actually get us to a better place. I do think the conversation is the one that I am raising, which is, why is it appropriate in the first place for us to send police officers into so many situations that have nothing to do with the violation of the law? They do what they're asked to do. I mean, in fairness to them, they're asked they get the call, they're dispatched. And so, yeah, this 911 system may also be a symptom as opposed to the cause, because we inform the 911 system. We say what we want it to do. I'm stepping back and saying, let's have a societal conversation here, and it can begin in our community. It's happening in different forms throughout the country, where we are fundamentally asking whether or not we want our police officers to engage in every situation, many, if not most, that do not have anything to do with an actual violation of the law. That's a hopeful conversation.
Where would this money come from if it's not, defunding the police department?
Well,
would this be something that could come out of Measure U as well?
Well, sure. Although Measure U now has been depressed, so to speak, because of the COVID crisis. Our sales tax now has gone way, way down. But I'm not skirting the question of the money. I'm actually, I think, being very upfront about it. The money question is very real about where the money goes. But you have a much greater chance of success if the money follows the function, as opposed to the money being the first thing that you argue about. Because ultimately, where does the money come from? Of course it can come from the existing police budget if they no longer need to perform the function and all of the functions that they're currently performing. That, by the way, that they don't want to perform. They don't want to be the mental health workers for the community. And I don't blame them. That isn't what they were trained to do. They do get training, but it's not really what they were trained to do.
Right. What other changes do you think? I mean, obviously that would be a major change, something that would be maverick to our country, because I don't think any other department has actually, we've seen any kind of change like that. That's definitely one of those police reforms. What other police reforms have you heard from the community that they want to see?
I mean, I think there are categories, but I'm not ready yet to announce my series of reforms. I want to take some days, and I want to work with the police chief and the police department and the community, most importantly, to identify those. But they're all out there, right? Whether it is finding ways either to change the state law or around the state law to address people who are still in the police force who have racist points of view, some of whom move from one agency to the next. We have to deal with that. How officer-involved shootings or death in custody are investigated, and whether there's real impartiality or independence to how they are investigated. Obviously, a continued discussion about use of force policies, even though the city of Sacramento, I think took some major steps, as did the state of California with AB 392 and our decision to lessen the use of foot pursuit. And now we're all getting rid of the carotid neck hold. And we need to go farther and deeper into that and take them as a whole, but also policy by policy. And so there are categories to me, and and I've identified really 4 of them. Rooting out the bias and dealing with systemic racism, the question of impartiality in terms of how the most serious incidents are investigated, the issue of continuing to look at use of force, and then that fundamental question that we've been talking about mostly, which is, should we redefine what we ask a police officer to do so that they are not involved in a whole host of interactions and confrontations that don't actually involve a violation of the law?
So, going further into that conversation, what would they be involved then in? You know what I mean? If somebody calls 911, we're not quite sure what the seriousness of the situation. How would we distinguish?
Unfortunately, people have their cars and their homes broken into all the time. There are genuine assaults and serious robberies that occur. I mean, society does not lack unfortunately, in actual crime. But I will tell you that a huge part of the work of a police officer is to do things unrelated to the commission of crime. And by the way, the majority of them that I know in this city do so compassionately. But from a societal perspective, from a cost perspective, and from an understanding that men and women who wear a uniform, who have batons and guns, that in and of itself is threatening to people.
Right.
I think these questions have to be asked.
Right. And I think, one of the other things is qualified immunity. Should police have immunity to not be sued in a civil lawsuit by a family or a victim?
I mean, I think I'm very open to changing that standard. I'd want to hear from the police and to hear their perspective on it. They would say, of course, that they already put their lives on the line every day, which they do. And so if you eliminate that qualified immunity, then you're going to make it much tougher for them to actually protect the public when there is a serious crime in progress. So I think I want to have that. I think I want to have a deeper conversation about that one.
So what happens next here in Sacramento, Mayor?
In Sacramento, we are not going to wait. The one thing that we all must insist on is that we don't breathe a sigh of relief and say, oh my, we got through this past week and these past days. That will not suffice, because that could be human nature. And yet we have to resist that with every impulse, because this is not going away. It is larger than just our very good police department and our progressive police chief and our progressive community. It's beyond us. We have to do our part, though, to lead and to show the way in each of these categories and continue to be a model, to build on what we have already started. And so we don't have months. We may not even have weeks, but certainly I want to be thoughtful about what we do next in each of these categories. And I want to do so not by myself, but with our community, with our police chief, and with our police department.
With that said, is there anything people need to know as far as, when will this conversation get started? What can they look for?
It's starting now. But the other thing I will say about conversation is that one of the messages from the protests, which I think is right on, is that what we've done before may matter a little bit, but not nearly as much as what we're going to do. That words are important, intentions are important, but the only thing that really matters is what we do going forward. Words matter, but actions heal. So it's got to be about the actions, and it's got to be thoughtful, but it has to be soon.
Well said.
Okay.
All right. Anything else you would like folks to know out there?
I think I said my piece, but thank you.
All right, Mayor Steinberg, thank you so much for your time.
Nice to see you, Mayde. Bye-bye.
Likewise.